Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming. I'm Nathan. Ho 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 everybody, and Merry April Miss. In one of my many playthroughs of Elden Ring, I asked myself one key question. What if all the debuffs? What if I want to poison, bleed, and freeze my enemies, while also being able to put grease on my weapons or enchant them with things like Blackflame Blade? I want every debuff, you see. And for a while I thought this dream was going to remain a dream. Then the heavens opened and Miyazaki himself bestowed his wisdom upon me, and it was one word: claws. 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 But that's enough of this intro's attempt at humor to hook viewers. Let's just jump right into it. This is the Warrior Santa Claus Oops All Debuffs Guide for Elden Ring. So starting off, this build's gonna be a little different than my others. By that, I mean less step-by-step-ish. If you watch the other ones, you know how to do the intro stuff. If not, go check them out. Pretty simple. Essentially, we're going to make a Dex Faith build, but mostly Dex, so I suggest starting with a Warrior and Seed. After that, you're gonna need to do all the stuff I do in every intro. Get the horse and summons, get the chicken foot on the beach, get a bleed weapon, warp to Caelid, and kill the dragon for all the souls. For early leveling, we're gonna need our Faith at 27. That's the highest we're gonna go, and then Dex to 14. After that, you're free to distribute the points as you wish. I suggest getting Vigor to 20 at least, getting Mind to 15-ish, and Endurance to whatever you want. Okay, now that we have that, we're gonna go north and cheese the Black Knight. Now, a lot of comments on my other videos asked if this is still possible, and as of the recording of this video, patch 1.04, the answer is yes. It's just way harder. Basically, the goal is to bait him all the way up the hill, and then when he loses aggro and attempts to respawn, he'll be basically respawning in an area that's not loaded in, which kills him. So in an attempt to prevent this from happening, the Knight seems to decrease aggro the further away you get from his spawn. However, it is still absolutely possible to cheese this. It's just very difficult. If this changes, check the description, I will let you know. If you can't kill him this way, you'll just have to kill him legitimate, because the reason we need to kill him is because his Ash Bloodhound step is baller. Let me just talk about this for a second. Alright, so I didn't mention Bloodhound step enough in other videos, so I'm mentioning it here. It is absurd and extremely good for basically every class. Basically, it's a low-cost mana, insta-ish cast of a teleport in any direction. While teleporting, you have iframes, meaning you can use it to dodge, avoid elemental damage, close distances, and more. Usually, I'd suggest putting it on a secondary weapon for situational stuff, but since we're building claws and the range isn't amazing, we're going to be using this on our main weapon as our main Ash. So at this point, you have two options. Go get our main claw or go get a side claw. I'm going to say we go get the main claw, which means we're going to have to get into the castle. Okay, so our primary claw we use is the Hookclaws. You are welcome to sub this out for the Raptor Talons later in the game, but honestly, testing both, they're about the same, so feel free to put upgrade points into the Hookclaws should you wish. They're very easy to get. After killing Margit, head into the castle past the guards. Once you enter the castle through the side route, instead of going up to the higher level, you just pop down under, kill the guy with the big axe, and in the corner here, you'll find the Hookclaws. I'll explain why we use claws over any other weapon in a minute, but we do have some other errands to run. Continue through the castle until you reach this grace. Then we're gonna head across the training field and down into a pit. Do better than I am probably doing in this footage versus the rats, and make sure you have a stone sword key. Remember, you can get two easily early on in either the Bridge of Sacrifice or at the shack. Also, the seller on the southwest part of the Weeping Peninsula sells them for 2,000 souls each. Either way, pop the fog gate open and head inside. Inside, you will find two important things: the Godslayer seal, which is why we needed 21 faith, and the seal we're going to be using, and the book full of Godskin spells. Feel free to take the book to whomever you prefer, be it Turtle Pope or the guy at the round table, but I always pick the Turtle Pope. Now, before we can continue, let's discuss incantations we use and why I picked claws. So incantations got some absurd buff spells. I'm going to tell you which ones to get first and why. First, you'll want both Black Flame and Black Flame Blade, which you get from that Godskin book. Black Flame Blade is, in my opinion, very underrated considering how strong it is later in the game. Basically, it's a very short weapon buff that also has a short casting time. As you apply a debuff on the enemy as well as some fire damage when you hit them. The debuff, however, basically does 2 to 5% of an enemy's total health over 2 seconds, which means it doesn't last very long, but you can keep reapplying it. I don't recommend using this early on. However, as you move to the late, mid, and end games, enemies have absurd health pools, and this absolutely wrecks them. Combining it with bleed, which we are gonna do, and being able to attack really fast, which we are, makes this combo absolutely devastating. The next one is Bloodflame Blade, which is found by killing a beetle north of the Rose Church here in Lunaria of the Lakes. This is an awesome buff that lasts a long time, essentially adding fire damage as well as applying a debuff to the enemy that makes their bleed bar tick up even when you aren't hitting them. Combined with a bleed weapon like the claws are, and you'll proc bleed constantly. Two important utility incantations are Flame Grant Me Strength and Flame Cleanse Me. Flame Grant Me Strength is found here behind Fort Gaul, defended by 2 chariots. You can pick it up as early as the start of the game. Flame Cleanse Me is also very easy to get, found in this camp in Lunaria under a tent. Flame Grant Me Strength buffs physical and fire damage temporarily, which is great for bosses, and Flame Cleanse Me is the greatest of all time because it cures poison and scarlet rot. And I would also recommend the usual boring incantations, buff spell, golden vow. It's found up in the Atlas Plateau, which you can get to by finding the 2 discs and then using the lift. It's in a shack up in the mountains, but you'll be invaded on the way there, so be warned. Golden vow is it's just too good. It basically buffs attack and defense for you and your allies / summons for a very long time, and I basically popped it before any boss. The last one I suggest is one I feel might be underrated, Bestial Vitality, which you get by giving the Beastman Death Root in D's Quest. It basically just puts a very light heal over time on you that lasts quite a long time and costs hardly any FP. It's a great way to save flasks. Okay, that's a lot of incantations. Why are we using claws? Well, here is why. So in Elden Ring, you can only cast buffs on the right hand, because if you have a seal in your left hand, then you only have a right hand weapon. And that's that. This works the same with grease. However, this is not the case with claws. With claws, if you buff the right hand weapon, you can actually then two-hand the claws, and instead of holding one claw in 2 hands, which would honestly be kind of funny, not gonna lie, but also extremely stupid, no. Instead, you just pull out another claw out of your pants, I guess, and dual wield them. This has the same move stat as power stance and claws, which we will get to. The secret, however, is if you buff the right hand and then two-hand the claw, both hands are now buffed. So if you put Bloodflame's blade on your right hand or any grease or whatever, now you have it on both hands. This is completely bonkers with stuff like Black Flame, any rot grease, Bloodflame's blade, lightning armament, blood grease, you name it. Not only that, the two-handed claws moveset is extremely fast when it comes to how quickly it attacks, meaning you apply these buffs very rapidly. It's awesome, and I recommend it, obviously, because that's what this video is about. However, I promised you more debuffs, and that's what we're going to do next. Slap Bloodhound Step onto your new claws, set them to keen because we're going to be primarily dex, and make sure you got Flame Cleanse because you're going to need it for the next part. So for claw number 2, we're going to have to head to Caelid into the Abandoned Cave, which is the same cave whose boss will give you the XP booster talisman. This cave is full of scarlet rot, and it sucks, so you're going to be using Bloodflame Step to get through it as quickly as possible. It's also worth pointing out, once you jump down, there's no getting back, so don't hop in unless you're willing to lose the souls you have. Once you Bloodhound Step your way through the cave until you reach the far room with the plant, head up to the back of the broken chariot and grab our secondary claw, Venomous Fang. Venomous Fang, as the name implies, has poison already attached to the weapon, one of the few weapons in the game that does. This is awesome. Let's add more debuffs. Head up to Lunaria and way up north to the manor by the giant smith. If you head to the lake on the right, there is an invisible beetle running around like the arrogant twit he is, so murder him with extreme prejudice for our Lord and Savior Santa Claus and take the Ash Hoarfrost Stomp. You can probably guess what's next. Glue Hoarfrost Stomp to the Venomous Fang and add Frost Attack. Toss that on your left hand, secondary to your Godslayer seal, and guess what? You are now applying Debuff City USA. Now, I'm aware that when you use Venomous Fang on your left hand, all that crap I went on about putting a buff on weapons in both hands doesn't apply anymore, but don't worry, I'll explain how we play this in just a bit. First, let's get some really important talismans. So we are going to be constantly debuffing our enemies, but that's not enough. We want to buff ourselves while we're at it, so let's go get some good stuff. I'd first pick up the Green Turtle Talisman from here with the Stone Sword Key. This one increases stamina regen a ton. I recommend it all the time, and particularly in this build, we burn through stamina like a madman. You'll probably swap it out later in the game, but for now, it's a godsend. Next, we'll want the Winged Sword Talisman. This talisman increases damage based on how many hits you've landed recently, up to a whopping 14% flat damage boost. Considering we're basically attacking constantly and quickly with claws, you're going to get this buff all the time. You can find the talisman after killing the boss at the end of this poison-themed dungeon in Lunaria, Stillwater Cave. You can honestly just Bloodhound Step through most of it and then just take the boss out. Not too tough. The next one, however, is a bit tough, and you might want to save it for later. We want Kindred of Rot's Exultation, which gives you a 20% damage boost for 20 seconds to nearby enemies are infected with poison or rot, which we also are going to do a lot with our new claw. It's found here in the Atlas Plateau in a dungeon that requires 2 Stone Sword Keys to get in. You also have to kill those 2 damn silverfish enemies as a boss, which I hate these guys and I hate that they're extra strong, but either way, if you can get it, it'll rule. There are 2 more that you're going to want to get later, but we can't get right at the start, unlike all the other stuff I've mentioned. The first is the Lord of Blood's Exultation, which does the same thing as Kindred of Rot, but with bleed, giving you a chunky buff. The second is Milicent's Prosthesis, which not only gives dex, but has the same effect as our Winged Sword Talisman. That one you can actually technically do early on in the game, as long as you have access to the Atlas Plateau. It just takes a while. You will have to kill her and cut the quest line early at a specific point. I was just looking that up if you want to get it early. So we have 1, maybe 2 or 3 talismans that buff us with a full stack eventually. How do we play the Santa Claus debuff special? So this build is redonk fun to play, but it does require you to be sneaky, just like Santa Claus himself. And by sneaky, I mean really fast. Basically, 90% of the time, you'll be dual wielding your normal claw and your poison claw without casting buffs. That way you can poison, bleed, and frost enemies, and usually they will die shortly after the debuffs proc, giving you a big buff for the next several seconds. You will be using Bloodhound Step liberally to get in and out of fights, dodge attacks, and basically be a ninja, which is also like Santa Claus. How do you think he gets down those chimneys unnoticed? Exactly. For bosses, things mix up a bit. The thing about Poison and Frost is while they're great, they also stay on enemies for a fairly long time, and hitting an enemy with Poison or Frost when they have it basically doesn't do anything. So for bosses, I usually buff with Bloodflame's blade just on my right hand, and then punch them non-stop like Krampus until they get the Poison and Frost debuff. After that, I switch off my Poison Claw and two-hand the other, rebuffing it if necessary and using Incantations when necessary. Now, you obviously don't have to do this. You could just keep both and buff the right hand. That would probably play perfectly fine, but I found that the double buff is absolutely worth trying. Plus, with Bloodhound step, it's really easy to back out for a sec, rebuff, two-hand, and jump back in. So yeah, this build absolutely shreds, so much that I took it into late game with little or no issues. But what about the stats? Okay, so the thing about this build is you're probably going to get hit, not gonna lie. Even with Bloodhound step, you're going to take some damage because you like to look your enemy in the eye as you claw them. Also, your range is terrible. Because of that, I would suggest getting Vigor to 40 quickly and Endurance around 25 to 30 as you need both stamina and the ability to wear heavy stuff. After that, I got my mind to 20 so I could keep incanting and stepping, and then pumped Dex as it's the primary damage dealer. As mentioned before, you need 27 faith to do all of the incantations as well as use the seal we have, but you really don't need more than that, so I won't put any more points into it. So we have triple debuff claws, talismans to buff us when we both attack and debuff, and a ton of insane incantations to further buff ourselves. Where do we go from here? Well, first off, I would suggest either the mushroom crown or the white mask as your hat. Both provide a chunky damage buff when you apply a debuff on enemies. Mushroom is poison and mask is bleed. This is the same as those other talismans, so whichever one you find yourself doing more of, wear that hat. It's probably going to be bleed, just saying. Aside from that, honestly, this was my kit all the way to the end of the game. No joke, you can get like 90% of this build right from the start and then just roll your way through the entire game. Bloodhound step is so good at keeping you alive, and the amulets give a percent buff so it'll scale with you as you level up. So yeah, you're just gonna rock everything. The only thing to remember is to switch to using Black Flame Blade against bigger bosses in the end game. Don't underestimate it. Its short buff duration is really obnoxious, but it absolutely shreds end game bosses because their hit point pools are so gigantic. Embrace evil Krampus Santa and become the debuff god killer. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts about this build. Have you been playing Claws? Do you like Claws? I really like that Claws are good now. In Dark Souls, they were always kind of meh, but I feel like in Elden Ring, they really amped them up, and I'm really enjoying this build. It just does so much damage once you get all the debuffs off. It's insane. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. Shout out to my man, Andrew O'Connor. Thanks for being a fan, buddy, and all of you have a great time in Elden Ring.